Hi everybody, this is David and welcome to Module 7 of Inclusive Classroom Strategies. This is it, folks. We are done on Friday, June 30th. So hopefully you will still watch this video. It is June 27th and this video will be posted tonight. Usually it takes about 5 hours to upload to YouTube. So tomorrow, Wednesday the 28th, you should be able to view it. So a few reminders. One is course evaluations. If you haven't completed your course evaluation, please do that. You should have been contacted by Viterbo asking you to complete a course evaluation. So please do that. Your ePortfolio. So if you are required to do an ePortfolio for this class, which is probably most of you, unless you're taking this just as a sole elective to get part of your 6 credits for your DPI licensure or something like that. But if you're taking this to obtain, your special education licensure through Viterbo, you're doing an ePortfolio. So look at the example and that I provided and also the link to the Viterbo ePortfolio page. So you have to scroll all the way back down to the bottom. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll see that. I posted that right at the start of class. I can't tell you how to make your portfolio. If you use Google Sites or Weebly, that's what a number of students use. But my role as an instructor is to give you feedback on your page of your portfolio that pertains to this class. So that's all laid out within that portfolio website of that Viterbo website of how to create your portfolio. You probably already have a number of pages created because typically this isn't the first class that you start out with in the program. But what you need to do is to email me a link and say, here's the link to my 626 page in my portfolio, and then I'll review it. And if there's something that you need to change or suggestions, I'll get back to you on that. Now that's not a requirement, okay? So you don't get a grade for your portfolio from me. It doesn't impact your grade process. You can email me and say, I'm not creating it right now. I'm going to create it at the end of summer. That's fine. You have that choice. But if you do want me to review it, you need to get it, create it, and then get that link to me. Now, when you complete your program, your licensure program, Viterbo will ask, your advisor or the department chair will ask for the link for your completed portfolio. And then they will go through and make sure that your portfolio meets all of the requirements. So that your 626 portion would be there along with your other classes. So I don't have any part in that. I don't go through and grade that 626 and say, yes, this part's okay and whatever. So that all gets done at the end. I'm removed from that process. So just to make that very clear. And so if you don't have that ePortfolio page done, again, you can email me and say, I don't have it done and I'm working on it, or I plan to do it, at the end of summer or whatever. The benefit of doing it now, of course, is that everything is fresh from the class, and that if you do have any questions with it, or if there's something kind of significantly misplaced on it, and you email me the link, I can recognize that and give you feedback. So just to make that clear, though, this does not impact your grade in this class. So the ePortfolio page in your completed ePortfolio, however, would be a requirement for you to complete your overall special education licensure program whenever that happens. So, dun, 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 dun. I took a bike ride today. Beautiful day. A lot of bugs out though, so I had to keep my mouth closed as I was riding. I have bigger sunglasses I wear to block out things. So that didn't really bother me, but yeah, a lot of bugs. And it was interesting to look in the sky because the contrails or the white lines you see, left behind from planes, everything kind of gets, the water vapor gets crystallized, and that's what we see, the little, cloud lines. They were all over the place. I mean, it was just crazy. So I actually took a picture because I hadn't seen anything like that before. So people were definitely out with their planes today. I guess I should look. I don't know. I know that EAA event happens in Oshkosh every summer, and maybe that's happening now or something. But it was unreal. I mean, I hadn't seen anything like this before. So I will grade your Bill Porter plans this weekend and return them ideally on Monday, and probably at the latest on Tuesday. I need to have final grades into Viterbo for this class by July 5th. So just so you're aware of that, the final grades for this class, I need to have those submitted by July 5th. You need to get me your Bill Porter plans by Friday, June 30th. I will print them, grade them by hand, scan them, return them to you electronically. You'll have it through Moodle. You'll have those. And I'll post in the announcements section, like Bill Porter plans have been returned. Please find yours, and here's where to find it. And then at that time, I'll go in and update all of the grades. So you might have some grades that haven't been entered from modules 4, 5, and 6. I'll go in and enter those, and all of those will be updated, so you'll have a chance to look at your grades. If I see anything that looks out of the ordinary, I will contact you, or I'll go back and I'll double check something too. But everyone is looking in good shape, as far as like having things submitted and where the grades are right now. So yeah. Again, you're going to see that over the weekend. That announcement, your Bill Porter plan is back, and like your grades have been, and all of your grades have been entered. So then go in the grade book and check that, and I will be making then a submission to Viterbo of the final course grades. So thank you very much for being active posters, and I really, again, enjoyed the UDL presentations that you put forward, from Prezzies to everything else. Just really a wonderful job, so thank you with that. Module 7. So really, what is it? It's the Bill Porter plan, of course, so you were able to watch that. There's also an ABC there's the ABC 2020, which you watched, but then there was a movie, I think, with Bill Macy starring as Bill Porter, that's available too, about Bill Porter. That video is moving in a lot of ways, not only from inclusion, but I think it can be used for teaching about bullying and awareness of differences. Counselors, I've known a number of counselors who've used that video, school counselors. So, but yeah, very, very, very moving. The other video, trombone player won it, that video. Again, play to your strengths. I think that's important for all of us as educators, but again, for students, and helping students understand you're not going to be great at everything, and you don't have to be great at everything. I remember I was a basketball coach for 5 years. I coached middle school boys basketball, and after the season, we did an outing at the local bowling alley. Just, pizza and just some bowling and just to have fun. And one of my best players in basketball was a horrible bowler, and it really kind of shocked me. I was like, how can Rob be so great, on the basketball court, and he can't throw the bowling ball down? You just think this is going to generalize, that he's going to have this level of athleticism and proficiency across all of these sports. And that was just a moment too of, it's like not everybody, and none of us, none of us are going to have this high threshold of being terrific at everything. And that's perfectly fine. But I think for kids, when they see report cards, and get assignments back, and maybe, like we had the Rita Pearson where it was the +2 instead of the -18, just to help students understand, you're stronger at this than you are at this. So make sure, we want to keep this area strong. So we don't want to divert resources away from this area. And we'll do what we can to mediate and to bring this area up, so it helps you out. But how many times do we see, where a skill is really good And then because it's really good, we kind of abandon it and we work on a skill that's not as good. And then what happens is we end up with two skills, one that's kind of eroded a little bit and one that's come up. So now they're both kind of in more of an average range, instead of taking something like that, you're really, really good at, and making sure that you're still putting resources into that. So I just like it. I think Marcus Buckingham is a tremendous speaker, and he has a lot of material out there, and I would use that also for staff, professional development. So to reiterate kind of the purpose of this class, and I do, have another blue shirt on today. I was biking. I didn't wear this shirt. I always wear the high visibility stuff, but this is a shirt. I'm going to go running in a little while, so this is it. But the purpose of this class was not to convince you to promote a full inclusion agenda. And, so as we go through the shout outs, a number of you would say, I'm almost there, for full inclusion, but here's what's holding me back. And that's perfectly fine. Okay. What the purpose of this class, what I hoped to do was to get you to really think deeply, ultimately, about least restrictive environment, and that you need a range of options available, and every discussion about placement should begin with that full inclusion regular education setting. And then if you're saying that here's what it would take for that to work, or no, that the student absolutely cannot tolerate that much stimuli or that setting, and because of okay, you've done that. And then, so what's your next option? What's your next option? But to understand what least restrictive environment is, and to revisit that at the IEP meetings, because what happens is we get comfortable with the placement, the student is in a pull-out setting and for 80% of the day or whatever, and it's that works. But then the question comes up at the next IEP meeting, I guess quote unquote works, but at the next IEP meeting, do you have a discussion of, can we move now to a more inclusive setting, whether that be an extra 20 minutes a day that student is included with peers, or what does that look like? So just, again, these discussions, all of this hinges around least restrictive environment. And some of these models don't exist in your schools. I mean, that's the hard part too, is, you're not going to have, by law, you need to consider a range of options, and the options need to be available for kids. But realistically, we know that schools only have so many options available. You have to get creative in how you do things too. But and part of that comes into, if you're using co-teaching as a way to, try to serve some students with disabilities in the classroom, or having push-in services for speech language or occupational or physical therapy. What does that look like? And how do you pilot that? How do you start to roll that out? But again, the purpose of this class is to get you to be thoughtful about least restrictive environment and how to have those discussions when it comes to students with disabilities or students with special needs in general, and integrating those students into the school setting. So let's get to shout outs. Jeremy, dun, 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 you wrote, and this is regarding your YouTube video search. Okay. You wrote, this is the 6th grade science lesson video at the 118 mark. The teacher made the statement, for your brains not to get overstressed, I have provided you with a calculator. I had a very difficult time with this because it was basic multiplication, 27 times 2.5, that all students should know how to do. It actually made me a little angry that the teacher would not expect the students to do that math. However, at the 210 mark, the experts began praising the teacher for removing the mathematical barrier for her students by providing them with a calculator. Basically, the teacher was praised for providing the appropriate tool to her students to solve the problem. I get the point that math can be a barrier for some students and that the focus of the lesson wasn't primarily on math, but in an inclusive classroom, I don't think that every student would or should need a calculator to do simple math. Where's the challenge in that? So yeah, you're right on with this, Jeremy. I can understand your perspective in this, and I think where we're at right now, and this is a good example, where we're at right now is this intersection of technology and being able to access information through like internet searches, like a Google search. So the question comes up when you look at curriculum is how much time do we want to spend teaching kids? When I was in school, we had to learn the state capitals. Okay, you had to memorize them. We had to test on the state capitals, and we learned cursive. There were other things, wrote information that you needed to know. I guess like some of the presidents, that was something. But right now, it's like I don't think I could name the state capitals. But I know I could go into Google and I could type in, list of state capitals, and it would be there. So, and the fact is, if we do have a calculator available to us, yes, we should know the fundamentals of math, but yeah, any of us, right here, I've got two calculators, one on my left, a genuine calculator, and then my phone over here, so I can bring up my calculator feature. So there's this whole thing with curriculum of how much have we moved in society where we do know we're going to be able to locate these pieces of information via online or via tools, that we're going to be able to utilize tools to acquire this information. So I think that's where we're at right now. I don't think it's all bad. I think it opens up the door to maybe instruct other things. Again, if you had a whole section that you were teaching on state capitals, do you really need to teach that anymore? Or do you just need to teach like a lesson on how to use search engines? Because the reality is, search engines will always be a part of our lives, going forward. So, yeah, I think this is kind of at a nexus, this question, and it's a really good one that you present here. Of what do we want to learn? And I understand, math is a process, so I see value in learning process, versus like a process isn't, state capitals isn't a process. But we are in this mode right now where a lot of curriculum areas are getting identified, and it's like, can that be something that is just found through, it's almost like an axiom, like something that's just known, so that you can just go in and search for that on Google and find it. And if you can, why should we occupy time and cognitive space with that? So, and I think also like teaching kids how to be really effective users of search engines promotes inclusion. So thank you for that, Jeremy. Darlene, you wrote, at this point, I still agree inclusion is the best for the majority of students. However, I question whether inclusion is best for all after reading the following statements. In quotes, the deaf community has been understandably tenacious in stressing that students who are deaf must attend schools where sign language is a primary language of instruction. Failure to do so can compromise the comprehension and appreciation of the curriculum. On the same page, 173, it reminds us that deaf students learn language visually through sign language. Then I thought, how many people in my building sign, and of those, how many are proficient at it? And if they are not proficient at signing, doesn't that put a deaf student at a disadvantage? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Yeah, that's a very complicated question. Actually, there is a court case that's based specifically on this. There is, as you identified, there is the deaf culture. And cochlear implants for a number of years, and I think it still exists to some level, but cochlear implants were frowned upon by the deaf culture. And if you were a member of the deaf culture and you chose for your child to have a cochlear implant, you could be shunned by the others in the deaf culture. So very, very much nuance there. One thing in speech language that I work with that falls into this the use of sign. People will question, the use of sign and verbal communication, augmentative communication. I've always stressed whenever possible to try to use all communication modes, because sign, you're right, a lot of people aren't going to know sign. Augmentative devices, yes and no, hit and miss with those. Some type, just think of Bill, okay, like Bill Porter. For Bill's speech, if you were with Bill like every day, if you were his classmate, if you're his teacher, you're going to understand Bill's speech. He'll be highly intelligible. You'll understand those patterns pretty well. So, and if Bill can't get his point across, he needs to bring out a picture or something like that, or write something down, that's fine. I don't think Bill would ever need to, use sign language. But yeah, it's a tough question. And instruction certainly is best delivered, through sign language. I mean, without a doubt, interpreting what the instructor is saying, and delivering it to the student via sign language, through an interpreter is critical for learning. You can't just hand the student something to read, and then they don't have that interpretation part going on. I mean, you'll never have dynamically what the person is saying, signed to you, and then that ability to ask the clarifying questions, if you're just getting things in print. But yeah, it's a terrific question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for this, but what you bring up is something that definitely would come into a thorough discussion at an IEP meeting about what is the least restrictive environment, and then the way that instruction is delivered, and then also, how do we make sure that the student is socially included with peers? To what level are we teaching signs to peers? And, to what level are we, I guess, are we not? It's really a great question, and this parallels, if you have students, English language learners. I mean, there are some parallels to that too. I mean, if you have a student that comes in to the school that speaks a very low prevalence language, and you do have an interpreter that's hired to work with that student, how much of that low prevalence language would there be an expectation that staff and students would be exposed to and would know, like core words and things like that. So, Darlene, it's really a good question. And these are the questions that require a thorough discussion at an IEP meeting. But yeah, this is kind of the one, it stumped me a little bit. I've been in this situation as a director of special education, actually, these almost identical situation. And yeah, it is very interesting because the deaf culture is very strong, is very strong. So, Anne, you wrote, being educated on this topic has greatly changed my opinion, and I think other professionals would feel the same way. I will advocate inclusion to staff members and encourage them to read this book, or at least chapter 3, so they can learn the information. So I'm glad that you're going to do that. I think people, once they acquire more information, that the primary barrier to inclusion is anxiety. It's people don't have information, and when they don't have information, they become anxious and they pull back a little bit. When they get informed, then they're much more willing to, I think, work collaboratively to serve the needs of a student. So the Bill Porter video was also a great tool to share with staff to center a discussion on inclusion. And there's another video. You can locate this on YouTube. Anybody can. It's called Educating Peter. Okay, Educating Peter. It's a documentary. It was done around 1980. It follows a kindergarten boy with an intellectual disability, and from like the first day of school to the last day, and how the teacher works with him, his classmates, how they support him, and the challenges. And there's some things in the video. You can tell, I mean, it's very early inclusion, things that we wouldn't find acceptable today, but it's really a tremendous video to watch to give people kind of a framework of understanding the process of inclusion, like how the incremental steps that go with that. And I think it also shows how peers can help support a student. Again, it's really a terrific video. The one part that probably is missing a little bit in there is the teacher was kind of put in a position of like, here is the student, and the supports weren't very clearly articulated in the video. There's a lot that fell on the students, which should have never fell on the students. It should have fell on to a co-teacher or a support staff member. But educating Peter is definitely a terrific video to watch about understanding early inclusive practices in schools. Again, it's done right around 1980. So, Patrick, you wrote, one thing that I thought was a little bit of a challenge to me was all of the different ways the three principles of universal design for learning was presented. One way it was presented as the what, how, and why. Another was as representation, expression, and engagement. Our book explained it as content, process, and product. The main issues that came from this was that in the first two examples, they included why or engagement instead of product, which was included in the book. So thanks for pointing that out. And it is the conflated terminology problem. And I apologize for the word soup, which you just identified. And I'm going to actually seek to kind of take those terms and parallel them and bring more continuity to those in the next class. But this is an issue, and I talked about it very early in class when we talked about mainstreaming and inclusion, just those two terms. And this is something that I need to go in and I need to work on to bring all of these terms kind of in alignment. What I would boil this down to, Patrick, after taking this class, is basically UDL is divergent, presentation divergent presentation by the teacher, by the instructor, and divergent representation of learning from the students. That it's divergent. You're getting away from this. This is your one answer, and this is the only way, you can get to that answer. Like everybody has to get to this answer in this way, which is the way for years that instruction had been delivered. And now saying, there's a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B. But, as long as you can get to point B and you have a logical plan to get there, that's fine. And I think to do that, too, gets into something that we don't see a lot in classrooms, and it's the use of a rubric or rubrics and exemplars, the different examples. And, again, having students understand what a rubric is and being able then to have some demonstration that fits that rubric, I think that's exceptional. So when I started to teach children that were blind, I needed to become very creative with presentation and representation. And I always kept the door open for a student to approach me with an idea of saying, can I demonstrate learning in this way? Not that I would always agree with that, but and this is something too. I mean, if you have 20 students in a class or something like that, you're not going to be able to do that for all assignments. But yeah, I think different options to demonstrate learning that's what I would take largely out of UDL. I think the presentation part kind of gets into from the teacher gets into the differentiated instruction. For example, I can't teach students via PowerPoints and things like that because, I mean, it's not optimal, or any type of visuals, but to have things presented in an audio format or tactily, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because again, visually impaired students. So let's move on to Sherry. Sherry, your shout out. You wrote, I had a 5th grade student ask me one time, why are you with blank for a student name all the time? He seems normal to me. That comment really struck me. The student being referred to was emotionally behavioral, had an emotional behavioral disability, and a pretty significant mental illness. Okay. First of all, thanks for noting that overt disabilities tend to be more validated by the public. So a student in a wheelchair, where I work, students who are visually impaired, students who are blind, use canes and right away. I mean, and part of the reason students are told always to carry their canes is so, people do recognize that they have a disability. So it's especially important if you see somebody, waiting to cross the street or something like that. However, a student with a severe mental illness or a learning disability, that doesn't have an outward presentation. So you can be with, behind that person in a line at a store and you're going to have no idea. So, part of that comes in with, as you indicated, just helping a student to understand this is the way that this student needs to learn. These are the supports that this student uses so they can access the curriculum, so they can learn. It's not equal, it's equitable. It's like what does the student need so they can access and benefit from the curriculum in the classroom setting. Let's see, what did I also wrote in here? We also have a tendency to just do this overall with kids, expect their decision. Oh yeah, okay. So the other part is, in general, I mean, teachers and adults, and I've done this with my daughters, and just you expect them to make decisions that you would make, and the fact is, child is learning, their frontal lobe is developing, so they are going to be impulsive. They are going to make decisions sometimes which aren't going to make sense to us, but they're perfectly normal. We know that the frontal lobe doesn't mature until age 25. So sometimes just even typical behavior and decision making can be interpreted as, that the student is acting out or something like that. And it's like, well, no, I mean, this is typical impulsive decision making. So when students get older, Sherry, this is where helping students understand how they learn, the different ways of learning, and having students being able to self-advocate and to describe that, especially to other adults, is extremely valuable. So I did a video with a student who just graduated after 2 years at college, and she talked about, I haven't published this one yet because I didn't edit it yet, but she talked about learning. She has a learning disability plus also has a visual disability, but talked about how she learns. So she understands how she learns material, and then how she can describe that and also work with like a disability coordinator, which is not any, different than, I mean, there's not much difference between that and working with a case manager for a high school student and saying, okay, this is the way that you learn. So, you're going to self-advocate as an IEP goal with your teachers and make sure that they understand the accommodations with your IEP and things like that. So, but yeah, it is something where, and I've heard this a number of times, in overt disability, I mean, seeing and, an overt disability such as somebody standing with a cane, somebody in a wheelchair, that people identify that, like as a disability, yet it's much harder for something that isn't visible. It's more abstract, and that takes disability education. So. Bonnie, you expanded upon the circle of courage with a personal story. And you wrote, I've been using this with the crisis my son and I are going through. Everyone has something to give, and every evening my son and I discuss something good that happened during the day. Sometimes it was just getting through the day, and something that we are good at or why we are good people. So me, first of all, I actually wrote on, I have that, but I'm sorry to read, that this is a challenging time for your family, and I do appreciate that you did share that in class. I think we all we all have episodes that we go through, or that we know coworkers or other people, and the awareness of what you're going through right now, Bonnie, will create in you a connection and an empathy with children that are going through similar challenges, and it's really going to be something. Well, let me just read what I wrote down. So, you describe what many students and their families go through: stretches of uncertainty due to a variety of reasons. Being able to talk about how a person feels, to put words to feelings, is very important. And it's not an easy skill, not at all. Most of us have solid tacit knowledge, meaning like we know what to do in a situation, but when it comes to like describing feelings, which are abstract, that's tougher. Research has proven that's tough for everybody to do. Goal setting is also very important to move beyond the moment. There's actually a research term for this. It's called simulated annealing. Okay. Simulated annealing. Annealing. It's pretty complicated. It's based upon a mathematical formula. I'm going to give you kind of a summary of it. And the only reason I'm bringing it in right now is it's a term that I'm using in my book. I just got done with a chapter that includes this term. It was shared with me by another researcher. But simulated annealing, think of a hot piece of metal, okay? So that piece of metal is hot because it's in a chaotic situation, which sounds kind of like what you're describing right now. And we know like students that go through times of homelessness, not knowing when they get home at night, where they're going to be staying, if there's going to be food, things like that. Or if, there's an illness in a family that's very serious, whatever it might be, but where there's a lot of chaos. So this piece of metal is very hot. Now, when that piece of metal is very hot, you can take that and you can mold that into a lot of different things. You can bend it into a lot of different things while it's hot. As it cools, you have fewer options for molding it. And if you bend it, if it's hot, it's a chaotic situation. You make a decision and you bend it in a certain way, and it's like, I think there's a better way to bend this to get it, to be what I need it to be. Then you just bend it. It bends, you can still adjust it during this chaotic situation. As it cools, as the situation kind of settles down, you actually have fewer options to molding that piece of metal. Just think the metal gets cooler, you're not going to be able to reshape it. Let's say you're trying to make it into like a fire poker or something like that. And eventually it's going to cool, and it's going to set into whatever shape that you worked it in during that time of chaos. It's going to set into that. So if you're using, as you said, that time of chaos to be very validating, very much working on introspection and reflection, then when you move out of that time of chaos, and people do, and chaos is virtually never permanent. Chaos is episodic. People in situations move into chaos, move out of chaos. When you move out of chaos, and there's, I don't want to get into too many terms, but there's another term called the Torus, which you kind of move out of chaos and you move into the Torus, Torus. think of Torus as a donut, okay? And you basically start at the top of the donut, and let's say it's a commute to work, and you go around that donut and up until you complete that circle, and then you're at work. So you leave in the morning, you're driving down the road in different cars and whatever, and you get back. Well, you're going to have some fluctuation within that donut. You might have different stoplights, might have different people, might have a little bit of rain, but generally, it's going to be within this zone. Like, you're going to be functioning within this Torus zone. And when you're not in that Torus zone, it doesn't sound like you're in this Torus zone right now. It sounds like you're operating more into chaos. Now, the thing with chaos is, you're responding the right way to chaos, and teaching kids who are in chaotic situations to do what you've just described, I think, is really important. So again, acknowledge those hot times, those chaotic times, and that those times present an opportunity to shape your future. And when you do make decisions during those times, you can usually tweak those decisions. Again, that simulated annealing. I don't want to get too complicated with terminology and bring in terminology that I didn't introduce previously in the class, but I'm just simulated annealing and, and Torus, I think, are two things that are very relevant right now. And just for people to understand that in general, if you want to talk about like what a day-to-day, what your day-to-day functioning is, that's your Torus. So let's talk about commute just in general. Okay, so if you commute to work, almost every day is going to be similar. Nothing will ever be the same. There is no such thing as sameness. It does not exist, because you can never have 2 points in time that are the same. You can 2 locations in time that are the same. Like if I get up tomorrow, and I try to replicate everything I did today, I cannot do it, because I've also learned information from today that will influence what I do tomorrow. My body itself is different. The environment is different. The humidity is different. Just everything. So you can really break these things down and say, there is no such thing as sameness. There is not. We know that. That's proven. There are similarities. So I guess I'm going to get back to this. So you go through your day and think about your day, and also think about that with kids. Is their day really like in a Torus? Is it pretty similar every day, or are they going way outside on a pretty frequent basis? And if they're moving outside that Torus, then they're in chaos. And during those times of chaos, you can definitely work on skills and helping students during that time of chaos. And then when they return to that Torus, they typically will retain what has been learned during that time of chaos. That might, again, this is kind of abstract and all of that, but it gets into why on September 11th, 2001, the September 11th attacks in the Twin Towers, over 500,000 people who were rescued in 9 hours from lower Manhattan by boat. And that was completely improbable. I've worked with the top researchers in the world on that. And we struggled to try to come up with a way to even describe how that happened. The fact is, once you enter chaos and you start to make some decisions, this simulated annealing in chaos, they can have really good effects to lead you, once you move into a lesser chaotic situation, into getting closer to, back into that Torus. Everyone's like, okay, Dave, enough with that. All right. Matthew, you wrote, I am a firm believer that every student needs to find success in order to learn. I think that there are times when differentiating can cause the best path of instruction for a student to be pulled out of the room and put in a separate classroom. I believe all students should have some inclusion, but I also feel that in certain circumstances it may not be possible if we want the student to succeed, and would argue that. I agree, Matthew, that the crux of inclusion is that discussion about least restrictive environment. This tends to be glossed over at IEP meetings. Let's be honest about it. We end up with the uni IEP, UNI, the uni IEP, meaning once the IEP is in place, the next IEP, the next IEP, the next IEP, they don't change much, okay, if they change at all. And we need to have those discussions about least restrictive environment and placement. Some schools do that really well, and some don't. Each IEP meeting should contain that discussion about increasing inclusion, what would be needed for that to be viable. And if it's not in the best interest of the student, like if you say that, it's the student isn't ready for it, and you have data to support that, like the number of outbursts that the student is having, the number of people that the student is able to interact with before they become overwhelmed, whatever it could be. Well, I mean, then you have your data. I mean, then it's like we're going to revisit it. We're going to keep working on the IEP goals to try to help the student learn academically, and then also equip with the skills to be in a more inclusive setting. But it's always going to be, you're going to consider it, but it might be that the least restrictive environment is going to be that pull-out classroom for that portion of the day. The key is at those IEP meetings to have a discussion about placement and to have that range of placement, talked about. So there's actually, on the IEP forms, there is, it has the area to indicate the placements, plural, that were considered for the student. Meaning, you don't fill it out with just one placement saying, we considered the special education classroom for, 50% of the day because that's been working. It's like, okay, that's one, but let's talk about maybe if there was an opportunity for inclusion. We talked about what it would look like to include the student one more hour, but, we felt that these were barriers to that. This wasn't in the best interest of the student, or the student's approaching this, and we're going to continue to work on these skills, and then we're going to, look at this at the next IEP meeting or whatever. So, Courtney, you wrote, each of the stories and suggestions we have heard tell us about a group of people working together to make inclusion successful and the norm of their school. Inclusion is not something that one educator can accomplish. Absolutely. It is not something that one person can accomplish. It will overwhelm any one person to do that. It will bring upon much anxiety. I've seen this shatter the confidence of even the most experienced teachers. And so you need to have a team approach in working, especially with very high needs students. As in my role as a therapy department chairperson, I stress a model that's extremely interdisciplinary. All of us work together on all of the goals to some extent. So, if a goal is to activate a student to activate a switch, the physical therapist is working on range of motion and strength to have the student reach the switch, and we'll take data on that. I might help a student, and I did. Here's an example. A student receiving physical therapy services, a visually impaired student, needed a workout routine. So the physical therapist and I were talking about this. The student had a hard time navigating a lot through the internet. Did have some cognitive impact from a traumatic brain injury. But so what we did, the physical therapist worked on a set of exercises with the student, and then worked with me, and we recorded these exercises onto an MP3, an audio file, and then we worked with the technology person to get that loaded onto the student's phone. And then there was just one button that the student needed to press. So then I worked with the student as part of a goal that the student would press the button, and then the exercises would play. It was the physical therapist. It was her voice. She addressed the student by name, and it was 10 minutes of a routine that the student would need to go through. It worked very well, actually. It worked very well. And then we shared it on a Google Drive, so the student had access to it when the student might not have the phone, and that others knew what the plan was, such as the parents and things like that. But it was pretty cool. But again, it was interdisciplinary because, the physical therapist was working on that. I knew and the therapist showed me what the student was supposed to be doing. I could hear, through the instructions. So after the student would activate it, the student would do some of those exercises, in when I was working with a student, although, my primary goals were on accessing the button and listening to what was being, asked of the student. And then also, like, if you missed something, how would you go back and replay it? So, but yeah, interdisciplinary. If you're on an island, and we see this, Courtney, sometimes too, like someone gets, I've heard administrators say, we have 4 sections of 3rd grade, and we are going to place students with disabilities, the most extreme disabilities, all in this one section because it's going to be easier for programming pull-out services and stuff like that, physical therapy time, things like whatever it might be. And then, we can concentrate equipment into this one room if we have specialized equipment that we need, whatever. And then the other part is this teacher is really good with students with these types of needs. Well, what that does is it just burns out that one teacher, because perhaps the teacher is really good with students with high needs, but it isn't balanced. It isn't equitable that all teachers and all students have, interaction with students with varying ranges of disabilities. So I think, that's another example that comes into play. Kirsten, your UDL Prezi, very well done. The expression, the how slide, and I think that's what you call it, the how slide. You listed a dozen options for a student to express learning. So to go with that, and this is something I think you could add to the Prezi if you want it. And Prezi was very well done. I think it would be like a rubric. You'd start with a rubric, and all of those 12 things would have to kind of filter through that rubric. So you'd have some kind of rubric in place of like what the expectations would be for that assignment, how they were going to demonstrate. And you gave options, and they were awesome options. A podcast, a 5-photo story, and narrated art, puppet video, quick edit video. I used to love those flip cams. I don't know if you guys remember those. They had a little USB port, and they were pretty small. And then they discontinued them, but they were really convenient, and not everyone wants to film things with their phone or like an iPad or something like that. And but anyway, or like geo mapping. I'm thinking even like geocaching. Things like that would be really cool. So, but yeah, I would also include with that teaching students how to interpret a rubric, and then how those 12 things, not that you have to get into each of the 12, but that all of those 12 things could be rated through that rubric. So, just think of like the Bill Porter plan that you did for me. You could do the Bill Porter plan as a document. You could do the Bill Porter plan as a YouTube video, like that you're presenting as if you're presenting that to teachers. So that's a video that they can watch and say, here's our student, here's Bill, here's some things about CP, and get it down to like 15 minutes or something like that. There's different ways. So, but thank you. You very divergent in the way that you assembled your Prezi. Timothy, shout out. You wrote, the practical side of this is the school and staff need to be on board to make it a success throughout the building, talking about inclusion. This is where the fun begins. To advocate for change and getting the veteran teachers who haven't changed their ways since dry erase boards replaced the chalkboard to see the benefits. I personally will have my classroom door open to all students and will let the students know I am here for all of them. I will lead by example. Awesome, Timothy. Yeah, one thing, I think every teacher is a teacher for all of the students, okay? And you've demonstrated that, leading by example. And the other part on this is administration needs to be on board and advocating, not only advocating, but at some point just mandating change. So let's say a teacher, and I've again seen this too, a teacher has a whiteboard, and the principal or the tech person says, okay, we can purchase more smart boards. Who wants smartboards in their classroom, and a teacher declines a smartboard because they're afraid of the technology, then that's ridiculous. Then the teacher needs to come out and say, I need to know more about smartboards. I don't know enough about a smartboard. I know what my whiteboard does, but help me to be educated about a smartboard. that's perfectly, I admire somebody that does that. And for me, like I had to do that. I wasn't using a smartboard, so I had to say, I don't know. So I sought out someone who was very good with using a smartboard and would go up during lunch sometimes. And this person would show me how to use some of the things, and then you just kind of pick it up and you just experiment with it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? So, but yeah, it is just amazing that people. And the thing, Timothy, too, is you talk about veteran teachers, but I've seen this also in teachers who have been in the field 1 or 2 years, who kind of shy away from technology, and even though they've been raised with technology, they'll say, I just don't. They haven't been raised though with putting lessons together on smartboards and things like that, and they kind of revert back to maybe the way that they were taught. So I have seen technology anxiety in teachers who are 25 years old. So I do think it crosses like a wide swath. But as you've indicated, the resources that are out there too, I think overwhelm people. And for people to say, and also for administration and schools to be very open and look for your internal experts. This is another part. Look for your internal experts. You have people who are really good at smartboards in your schools. And as an administrator, if you empower those people and say, listen, we're going to give you some time to, help someone else or mentor someone else on a smartboard, that's awesome. I always try to do that, to find my internal experts. Not that you overwhelm that person and all of a sudden they have, they're expected 8 days a month to be helping other people and not doing, their own work. But the other part is, that you free a teacher up who is not familiar with using a smartboard or has some apprehensions to go in and spend a few hours with a teacher who uses a smartboard and go in there and watch and talk to that teacher beforehand and how that lesson unfolds. We send people to conferences, but we never really send people right across the hall to a teacher who might be doing something really innovative and creative. And everybody has things like that. I think everyone has something to offer. So maybe that teacher that goes over there, but then, they have something that they can share back. So finding the internal experts and the internal expertise and cultivating that, I think, goes a long way. So, one of the things too is I learned Braille from a student. It was a high school student that taught me Braille. So when I worked early in my career with Stratford School District, it was a smaller district, I think probably about 800 kids K-12 at that time. They had 3 or 4 high school students that they basically had assigned as tech assistants. So I think they got some credit for it. They worked with a technology coordinator, and they would go in and they would help set up programs and help teachers, and again, we're talking 20 years ago, but learn, some of the basic technologies, how to use like a scanner and stuff like that. And it was really cool, that was there. So always, look at those opportunities too. Andrea, as we wrap it up here today, Andrea, you wrote, I do question whether inclusion is appropriate for students with severe behavioral challenges. For instance, I have one student who has major meltdowns where she physically attacks anyone who happens to be near her. These meltdowns appear to come out of nowhere. While I would love to see her fully included with her peers, she is just not ready at this time. We work on social skills, calming strategies, etc. And while I've seen improvements, I know she has a long way to go. So Andrea, this is perfect. Like you are doing things the right way. I would just add into this that you didn't mention a functional behavioral assessment or a behavior support plan. So if those haven't been done, those are areas that should be included with this girl trying to find, antecedents, trying to make sure that you have a behavior support plan or even like an emergency support plan if a student does become, very, very violent. But you take data, you expect setbacks, and you try also then to work with third-party providers. Child probably has a counselor, probably has a physician that they're working with, and maybe have a contact person for that, counselor, school psychologist. But yeah, you're doing this the right way, and you recognize that right now for the student to have a student more fully included with peers, it's not good for the student. The student's not ready for that. So, but yet, it's like we're working on goals. Great. So you have goals to address that, and then incrementally, next IEP meeting, can we make a change? Can we? And if we can't, then we can't. If we make a change and things don't work out, then they don't work out. But again, it's that discussion of least restrictive environment. There's kind of this portrayal out there somewhat of like, if we don't have full inclusion, then we failed the student or whatever. Absolutely not. I mean, if you haven't had the discussion, though, of least restrictive environment and trying to understand through functional behavioral analysis and IEP goals to help equip the student, then that's where, we can look and say there's some gaps in how we're trying to support some students. But there will be some students that, if, again, I worked with in a situation where there was a middle school girl with very, very high anxiety, and it was pervasive through all settings. If they would go out shopping, parents and everything like that. And bright, student was an AB student, but this anxiety would shake like if got toward the school door, and it took a lot of creativity, a monitor, kind of a Skype setup between the classroom and with the student at home, and some things like that, and a lot of time and outside therapy and things like that to desensitize the student, and help with coping strategies to get that student included in school just a little bit more. So maybe even like at 4:00, or on an in-service day when other students weren't there, that, the student might come in and spend a little time in the school. But, you're going to have situations like that. So acting in the best interest of the student, that's the thing. Acting in the best interest of the student in your decision-making. That's really what the federal law says, too. You're acting in the best interest. So I think you've really put that together well. Thank you, everybody. And actually, I'm getting a new boom arm. The microphone is just sitting right here right now, so I kind of have to lean forward. So it's a little bit awkward. But thank you for a wonderful class. You have really done everything that I had asked for. Participation, very creative. You've been critical, thinkers, critical analysis, been very open with the experiences that you've had, and I think you've challenged the content. I think you've challenged, done a lot of introspection, looking at your own beliefs, done reflection on practice, and you've been really wonderful to work with. So I am very thankful we've had this opportunity together. Please submit your Bill Porter plans by Friday. I do need to get everything graded and submit it to Viterbo by July 5th. I have to. That's a requirement. And be looking, over, either Sunday or Monday into the class for the grades, for a posting and announcements saying, here your Bill Porter plan's been returned. Check your grade book or wherever I return it to, and then that your grades have all been entered into the Moodle grade book. Which will happen over the weekend. So again, there'll be an announcement saying that. And any questions with that ePortfolio, please scroll down and read through that. So as far as question, should you use a Google site or Weebly or something like that? I really can't answer that for you. That's not my role. I can tell you those are popular, but there's a lot of ways that you can do that and take the lead from what's provided from the Viterbo materials. So thank you very much, and I wish you the best for the remainder of summer. And I hope for a while that our 60-degree days are done. I was out in, what was it, just a couple days ago. I'm like, I don't remember like a June, 20th or 22nd or wherever where I'm out at night and it's like 40 degrees and I have to have a hat, like a winter hat almost on to run and things like that. And maybe just too, as I get older, I need to wear more, jackets and things like that. I don't know, maybe. But anyway, Thank you very much. And any questions, please email me. Thank you.